Okay, welcome to the 66th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Richard Hughes. Richard is a qualified and accredited psychotherapist with the UK Council for Psychotherapy. He specialises in helping people in many areas. Some of these include relationships, anxiety, depression, stress, and boarding school issues. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks. It's really good to be here. Good to catch up with you again.
Yeah. So thank you for agreeing to speak. And I read your article about time to abolish boarding schools quite
Yes.
recently. And then I was like, oh, I'd love to speak to you.
Hmm.
And so that's how I reached out. So I'd love for you to begin just by sharing a bit of your journey. How did you get into the work you now do, Richard?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think really it is an outcome of having been to boarding school, really.
Mm.
Um, when I guess, got into my early 30s, I began to really question why I found relationships so difficult, why I felt the way I did, why I had this sort of low-level depression all the time, and why I was really struggling. And all I really knew was that early experience from the age of 8 had been highly stressful. I mean, I understand now that it is trauma, but I just knew that it had a huge impact on my sense of self and how I was in relationship with others. And outwardly, I think I presented really well. I can be very outgoing. I'm very social. I love send me out into a crowd, and I absolutely love it. But deep down, there was just something that I was just really struggling with. So in my early 30s, I started therapy, and it was straight away. It was the first thing that we were into, and yeah, that was the beginning of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can really resonate with that.
Yeah,
Outwardly, to others as an ex-boarder, we seem as if we've got it all together.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you as well.
Mm.
Obviously we've been planning to talk for a while, and I just wondered how you feel talking about all of this again. I'm sort of curious about how I've been feeling over the past couple of days as we've approached, you know,
Mm.
going into all of this and sharing stories together.
Mm.
So yeah, kind of intrigued how you feel
Yeah,
about talking about it.
thank you. I mean, part of me loves talking about this
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated. I feel, as I said before on our previous conversation, I feel this is one of the key issues of our leaders, humanity. That's my belief.
Absolutely.
And then on the other side of things, I could feel the Sunday night feeling last night.
Me too.
Mm,
Yeah.
got a podcast
Yeah.
to, boarding school. And I think when I began these, I used to get terrified. I
Mm,
remember speaking to Joy and I was like, really
mm.
frightened, speaking to the head teacher type thing. Oh my God. And now I feel some nerves. I've started to reframe it that, oh, that's really good. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
that's how about you?
yeah, well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that Sunday night thing, because of course Sunday nights were the nights we went back to boarding school, when they, after half term, we've just had a half term, um, exeat or whatever. So that Sunday afternoon feeling was just, I mean, it was just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Um, and I used to cry, and it would just, it would start about 11 a.m. and then, just be crying and crying. And, by about lunchtime, my mum would just be fed up with it. She would just be like, okay, enough now, enough, you need to pull your socks up and kind of get on with it. But yeah, still that Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening feeling, completely associated with being wrenched away from home, being wrenched away from, my pets, my bedroom, all those kind of comforting things, and being thrown into this environment that was just brutal and scrutinizing and, actually physically threatening as well. So yeah, it was just horrendous.
And how have you been leading up to this interview for yourself?
Up to today. Yeah, yesterday was a little tricky, I have to say. I had to take it a little easy. Went and found some grass, trees, just went and took it very, very easy. Yeah, I wasn't feeling great, I have to admit. But like you, I think it's cathartic to talk about it. It's incredibly important that we do. And I think, if it just helps one person, if one person stops and thinks, okay, do I really need to send my kid to boarding school? If it makes one person go, okay, maybe this explains something, and I'm going to go and do some therapy. I'm going to go and read about this topic. I'm going to work out why I feel the way I do. Hey, I'm really happy with that. Really happy with that.
Thank you. Well, bless your courage in speaking up. I appreciate that.
Well, we're both here, so it's all good.
We are.
Yeah.
So my next question is really,
Yeah,
is if you could just introduce a bit about attachment,
yeah,
and especially you spoke in your article, and I'll put the article into the description. So if people want to read it, I really recommend it. Great article. You talk about good enough attachment.
yes,
Maybe
yes.
describe a bit about that.
So I guess we all have an attachment style, and that attachment style is evolving. Maybe we have different attachment styles at different points of our life, depending on different relationships. But our attachment style is really an outcome of different psychosocial factors. So within that are developmental factors, relational factors, genetic factors, hormonal factors, kind of class, sexuality, all sorts of different factors make up how we are in relationships. And of course, it would be fantastic if we all had lovely, secure, stable attachment. And the reality is that I don't think anybody does really, but as long as we have kind of good enough attachment, good enough secure attachment, that makes us a functioning human being, basically. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off parents. I think, it's something I come across a lot. I'm sure you do too in your practice, young parents who really worry about, are they good enough as parents? Are they doing the right thing? Are they holding their kids enough? Are they putting in the right boundaries? All of that. And, I really do try and reassure them. I say, look, there was this great guy called Donald Winnicott, talked about it, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, talked about, just being good enough. And that's all that we have to do. And that makes us a functioning human being. And I think the thing that really strikes me with boarding school is that, therefore, just as a parent, you have to be there for your kids, you have to show up, you have to be there, you have to kind of give them lots of, cuddles and care and listen to them and all of that. But the thing about boarding school is that kids are not with their primary attachment figures for what? 7 months of the year. 7 months of the year, kids at boarding school have no attachment. They have zero attachment from their primary attachment figures. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. That is abuse. I mean, that is absolutely disgusting. And I can feel myself already beginning to get upset about that. And of course, kids in boarding school are not meant to be touched. That's the whole point of being away at a boarding school. And I'm sure parents are really thrilled to know that their kids are not being touched and cuddled and all of that. But they're also not getting any care. They're not getting any care for 7 months of the year. And I don't know. it makes me feel really ill, actually, even thinking about that. It's shocking.
Thank you. Thank you. It reminds me of I can't remember if it was Romania under Ceausescu
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
China.
Yeah,
This idea that the babies in these orphanages,
yeah. The
they were
remain.
totally dead, kind of dead, lifeless. As soon as they'd
Yeah,
been picked up, they came back to life again. That importance of touch,
that
of
importance.
Prince Charles, I think, or King Charles. It was said that his mother never touched him,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's
It's
like,
just, we discover our sense of self by seeing ourselves reflected in our mother's eyes. We need to know that we exist.
mm, mm,
And when we don't have that at these hugely important developmental stages, 7, 8,
mm,
some kids get sent away at 12, 13, 14.
mm,
It's just, your whole sense of self disintegrates. It's
mm,
it's it's shattered. And this is, this, I know this. This has been known about for what, 70 years. Bowlby was doing this after the war.
mm,
I mean, this is not kind of someone's opinion. This is scientific research. This is child observation studies. This has been around forever.
mm,
And people are still sending their children away. I just think it's absolutely outrageous. I
mm,
just don't understand it.
mm.
It would be kind of like going, oh, I'm going to give my child heroin because that will just make them happy. Well, it's like it's no different from that. It's like, we know this is not good for you. Do not do it.
Mm, mm,
And one thing I find really hard, I'm sure you do too. I'd love to hear your kind of your experience of it, but friends who are sending their kids to boarding school, just how difficult that is, talking with them about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in my last podcast, I mean, I went back to my old boarding school
Oh yeah,
the first time since I'd had my breakdown, since I had read Nick's book. So it was, post realization about the impact of boarding school.
yeah,
And one of the ladies I was who was on my year, she was there. She didn't recognize me, but she
uh,
had her child there in uniform, and I'm like, and it
yeah,
shocked me.
oh
And
yeah,
actually, it impacted me being there a lot more than I thought because I'd done so much therapy and work over the years. But
mm.
seeing the people
Oh yeah,
that I was at school with who were still, it's amazing, it's a great place. And I'm like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
yeah, okay. So yeah, not many of my friends do send their children to boarding school,
Mm.
fortunately. Um,
It's
most of them don't, yeah.
yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that idea of kind of complex trauma,
Mm,
the intergenerational aspect of it,
mm,
the this idea of the privileged child, the special child, and we just repeat. Parents just repeat this trauma.
mm,
They know deep down, they know this isn't right, but
mm,
they still think, got to give our kid the best chance in life. They're extremely privileged, and
mm,
they appreciate that. All of this bullshit,
mm.
and they carry on. They carry on.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, they do. So one thing I'd be fascinated to talk about was the article you wrote that in 2019, Time to Abolish Boarding Schools.
Yeah.
What drew you to writing that? And, you know, can you explain a bit more, what your findings were?
Yeah, I think there were two or three things at the time. I mean, one, there were some really high profile cases. So I think, I remember, Ampleforth was being investigated at the time, and then that kind of expanded out. There's the Catholic private school down in Ealing, which again, a long history of sexual abuse going on there. Just sort of, that's always seems to be ongoing. Um, there was that whole movement about girls talking about boys kind of grabbing them and touching them in these private schools, in these boarding schools. And then also I met someone who had been to my school, a young woman. She was sort of about 22, 23. And I kind of said to her, "Oh, I'm sure the school has really changed." And she just burst into tears, and she just said, just unbelievable bullying at this school. And I was like, "What?" She said, "Yeah, and it had a reputation for that. Even before I came to the school, it had a reputation for bullying. And when I was there, I suffered so badly." And again, outwardly very attractive young woman, very outgoing, worked in the media, very glamorous, very sort of functioning looking. But yeah, had experienced terrible bullying. And I thought, what is it about these schools, and especially the school that I went to? I've got a good friend um, who was about 4 years older than me, but we became friends kind of later in life. And whenever I meet up with him, he kind of goes, "Oh, Charlie so and so, he killed himself. Oh, do you remember George? Oh yeah, he killed himself." And just, I mean, he always has an anecdote. And I thought there's something, and then of course none of this is ever makes the press. It never kind of hear about it. I mean, people I know, I've got sort of three old friends from that school who are no longer here. Kind of like coke overdoses, alcohol. It's all the same stuff. They might as well have committed suicide. They did commit suicide, basically. So yeah, I'm kind of curious about it. So yeah, again, long-winded answer, but that was it. I really was ready to go back into it and think, I need to explore this a little bit deeper.
Thank you. I can really resonate with you. I went back to my old school 2.5 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I went to a gathering of sexual abuse survivors. I think I mentioned to you.
Yes.
And speaking to one guy there, know a few of the people just saying, "Oh, do you know this person? He committed suicide." A guy on the year below me at school, he committed suicide recently, and it's like, wow, so many of them. My uncle, who was an ex-boarder, he committed suicide a few years ago, and it's like so many of these people that I knew, have died, and it is surprising.
It's not talked about, is it? It's not there. There's no sort of research into it, or no one's really kind of shone a kind of spotlight onto that. But I'm really curious about it, and yeah, I would love people to, I don't know, share anecdotes about that, or to bring some attention to that if anyone knew, their own kind of experiences of this. It could be really
Yeah.
helpful to add to the kind of mix of research.
Yeah, yeah, because we have the amazing research of Alex Renton, who's put a database together of 1,100 people who've been sexually abused
Mm,
at schools. I think 80% of which are boarding schools. I think
mm,
over 300 schools. But it would be an interesting database to have of the people who have committed suicide.
yeah, yeah, it would.
Mm,
Yeah.
since their school days. Um,
I got sent to the same school as my dad, and his best friend at that school committed suicide when he was 19, threw himself under a train. And when I went to that school, there was a photo. There was the house photo from 1955 of my dad sitting next to this very handsome young man, and that was the guy who killed himself. And that always really impacted me. It was always just something that sort of hung in the air. And yeah, it's just
yeah. Well, when I went back to the school 2 weeks ago, I went back to visit the train tracks of my friend where he committed suicide while I was there, and you know the impact that it had on nearly everyone who was at school with him.
Yeah.
And it's you know.
Did that happen whilst you were at the school? Was he
Yeah, I was 14.
14? Okay.
It was kind of, yeah, it was devastating on one level.
Mm.
Um, it was the one person I would speak to
Mm.
in the school, and then yeah, one day he jumped in front of the train. You know, again, shining light, very popular, band
Mm.
captain. You know,
Mm.
in sports teams. It's
Yes.
like to ask that question, why? Well,
Mm.
why did he die? So yeah.
Were you given any support for that?
I laughed because we were sent to the priest who
Of course.
sexually abused me. So, or he did actually sexually abuse me. So, yeah, yes, and that's the thing which hurts the most, I think, is
Yeah.
that when you were most vulnerable and you really needed help the most.
It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? Absolutely shocking. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which makes me so passionate about this work is to understand, you know, like the neglect and all those things you've spoken about, you know, the abandonment, the homesickness, all of these things that's still going on now. I
Mm.
mean, I find that when someone says, you know, you talk about that at the end of the article about have boarding schools changed. I mean, in your mind, have boarding schools changed? I know I'm jumping to the end, but there we
Yeah. No,
go.
no, they haven't. Absolutely, they have not. I mean, they are. I tell you what, how they have changed. They are extremely good at marketing themselves. They are extremely good at selling a kind of PR version of themselves. They're brilliant at it. They have the best resources. They have the best agencies working for them, and they are absolutely superb at doing that. So yes, they have changed, on that level, but fundamentally they have not changed at all. And there isn't any support. They don't. I mean, they talk about pastoral care. They don't have any pastoral care. It's absolutely nonsense. It's minimal. And the teachers there, they're not trained in any of that. They don't understand that. They don't have, the majority of them don't have a kind of psychological background. They just don't. They don't get it. Um, like one anecdote I heard was that one of these schools, sort of top boys boarding school, they were saying, oh yes, we have kind of year fathers. So an older boy looks after a younger boy. I mean, that's just absurd. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life. I mean, how can an older boy look after a younger boy? I mean, he can maybe give him a little bit of guidance. I mean, if he's that interested, generally they're not. But to put that responsibility onto an older boy, it's absolutely disgusting. And yeah, I mean, there's too many kids there that need care and support, and they're just not going to get it. And matron's not going to give it to them. And the priest is not going to give it to them. That is for sure. I mean, that's the oldest one in the book, isn't it? I mean, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, no, they haven't changed, and they don't want to change. They don't care. It's not what they're being paid tens of thousands of pounds by each parent to deliver. They're being paid one thing, and that's to get them into half decent university and get them through A levels and all of that. You know, that's all the parents really care about as well. So yeah, as you know, I mean, again, Wickham Abbey and that very tragic story of that young girl. I mean, it's an absolute tragedy. The pressure that she was under, by all accounts, was immense. And,
Do you want to tell the story? I don't know if maybe from the
well, obviously tread carefully here, but because I'm just going with the kind of the press story. But young girl, how old was she? I think was she 14 or 16? She committed suicide under a huge amount of pressure. Kind of expat parents, I believe. So that school has a real reputation for hot housing kids, and yeah, that sense of not being good enough, uh, yeah, maybe not living up to the standards that are expected in that school. I'm sure there were many factors, but there's been a lot of speculation around that. So, but these schools, they create a sense of of splitness within people, don't they? Are you good enough? And if you're not, what does that mean about you?
And yet, I mean, for me, yes, and I say this to other guests, it's like on the surface, for me, I was one of the successes. I was captain of the athletics teams in the first 15 rugby.
Yeah.
But I learned to hide that, especially after what happened with my friend. So on the surface, I looked as if I was I'd split really well.
Yeah.
But then as I had my breakdown, it was like, I actually know there's a part of me inside which is split. It's totally grieving.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's really interesting. I think some kids, they really step into that kind of false self, don't they? They step into being academic or being, sporty, kind of colluding really with the system and the structure. I found that really hard. I wasn't able to do that. I'm not particularly sporty, so straight away I was at a kind of disadvantage on that. And actually, I look back on it, and I think I didn't do well in my A levels. I completely messed up. I didn't do particularly well in my GCSEs either. And I look back on that, and I think there was a sort of cognitive kind of fracturing almost. There was just something like, because I was under so much stress and trauma, I just wasn't able to kind of focus on stuff. And when I got to university, suddenly I became academic, and I was a sort of grade A student the whole way through, and I've never sort of looked back on that. And I love academia now, but at school I couldn't get my head around it. It literally wouldn't go in. I think it was my prefrontal cortex was just not, it wasn't developing. It was like, it was all just, everything was offline. And I just couldn't kind of cope with it or kind of manage it. I mean, my way of soothing or finding release or finding some way to kind of express myself was in art and drama, and those kind of things which appealed to me, because you're always a bit of the outsider being up in the art school or whatever, and it's kind of some of the kind of cool kids as well. So it was something that at least gave me a bit of respite from all that. But
it's interesting. Thank you. About the brain. I think it's Bessel van der Kolk talks about that. This idea that when we are in fear, one of the overriding feelings, although I was good at sport, was fear of messing up. I felt like I was in fear all the time. And noticing I didn't feel particularly, I wasn't particularly academic at school either. I was average. Again, at university, suddenly pressure was off. Oh, yeah, I love studying. I love learning. Yeah. And it makes so much sense that the brain, as Bessel van der Kolk says, when it goes into fear or the freeze response, there's no activity. You can't think.
Yeah. That freeze, sometimes it was freeze. Most of the time it was fight or flight. But there's no room for a Latin book when that's all going on. There was just absolutely no room for it at all. So, it's just weird.
So thank you. So let's go kind of to the beginning of boarding school. The first day, you talk about this a bit in your article, and maybe we spoke about it as well a few weeks ago. The first day, the first night at boarding school, what's the impact of that, and how was that for you? I'm happy to share how it was for me, but how was it for you?
No, I mean, I can remember it so clearly. It's literally visceral, kind of bodily feeling. I mean, it's just horrendous. Arriving there. So I was 8, and arriving there, and being sent up to this dormitory, and this kind of this veneer that everything was going to be okay. Parents still around, and the teachers and the headmaster, and then parents go, and you just have this absolutely overwhelming fear and dread, and there were probably like 15 of us in the dormitory, something like that. These awful metal beds, I mean, all the kind of boarding school kind of cliches, but beds like with springs like this. And when I looked around the school, the headmaster had said to us, "Oh yeah, boys are allowed to bring a teddy bear, and they have it on their beds." Now I remember that there weren't many teddy bears on the beds.
Mm.
And I kind of clocked it, and I thought, oh, there's something not right here.
Mm.
And at the time, I used to have a Snoopy that was my sort of absolute transitional object. I was obsessed with this little toy, um, and I took it to school with me. But I thought, I'm not putting it on the bed. I'm not doing that. And I kind of put it underneath the mattress. And literally the first night, I mean, anyone who bought a teddy with them, it was ripped apart. It was thrown out the window. That was like night one. And all these little 7, 8-year-olds just sobbing all night. I mean, it was brutal, and just no sense of absolutely no love, no care. Um, I'd I'd had a cat, really from the day I was born, and he was a Burmese cat, and he used to sleep in my bed every night. So at the age of 7, 8, having to kind of go away, um, it was the first time I'd ever kind of not slept in a bed with my cat. And then, of course, the abuse started, which that didn't take too long either. So yeah, the boy who ran the dormitory, he was called Haynes, and he was, how old was he? 12, 13. He used to take great pleasure in making us remove our pajama bottoms, and then he'd like whip us with a leather belt. Now he did this to everybody in the dormitory apart from me. And he didn't do it to me because I literally was like a little mouse. I just didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. I just kept my head down. Really, really try. And he kind of picked on the kind of the kids who were kind of playing up or expressing their trauma. So yeah, they were the ones who really got it. But eventually, it turned on me. And I said, no, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to let you do it. And I ran out of the dormitory and ran down to the matron, who was absolutely furious, kind of grabbed me by the kind of ear, kind of pulled me back up to the dormitory. And, I was like just sobbing and crying, and I was getting, he's whipping us with a leather belt. And then the headmaster like turned up. I mean, it was like a massive thing. I mean, this headmaster was apoplectic with rage. He was always full of rage. He was a deeply unpleasant man, Mr. Jameson, deeply unpleasant, kind of sadistic. Again, your lovely boarding school cliche, sadistic headmaster. And all I knew was that then I think maybe the following weekend was an exeat, and I told my parents, and my dad said, I'm going to come down to the school and have a chat with the headmaster. And I said, no, please don't do that. Don't do that. That's just going to cause loads of problems. And anyway, all I knew was that about a week later, the boy was removed and put in a different dormitory. So, and then we got a different head of dormitory. And that was the end of it. Years later, I mean, probably actually not that long ago, I was talking to my dad about it, and he said, and he said, yeah, I came down to the school and I said, if you don't do something about this boy, I'll get the police involved. And so hence it was sorted out. Now, on one level, you think, well, this was back in the, when was it, early 80s. Um, that was great that my dad did that. He still left me in that school. He still didn't have that boy removed from the school. Still didn't have that school investigated. I mean, that was all going on still, wasn't it? So, and when my dad told me, I felt really grateful that he'd done this. And then literally was like, no, hang on a minute, it still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, you know. And I think that says something what we kind of put up with, or what we're grateful for when things do seem to kind of get sorted a bit. It wasn't sorted enough.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful story. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
But I mean, it was like that all the time. I mean, you were just, sure it's the same for you. You're just ducking and diving it. I mean, if you get lucky, you've got a decent 12-year-old looking after you. If you were really unlucky, you got, the spawn of Satan, who would just make everyone's life hell. And of course, I look back and I realize those kids were, deeply traumatized themselves, but it wasn't the right environment for them to be in, and they weren't being given the care that they needed. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
How about you? What was your sort of memory of that sort of first night?
Well, I think for me that first night was interesting because I really didn't get on with my father, who was a military officer, an alcoholic, very physically violent, and I used to fight with him. My sister said to me years later, it was, decided you would go to boarding school so you wouldn't kill each other.
Right, okay. How old were you at this point?
I was 11 when I went. So I went at 11, and that first night, I quite liked it because I was away from him.
Yeah.
And and sometimes people say, oh, if your family life was really chaotic, then boarding school was a good thing. I think, yes, in certain cases that's possible. For me, home life was pretty terrible on one level, but I also had my mother, the dog, my sister, I had my bed, I had, some space. Whereas I think at school, first 3 weeks were good. Teddy bear, exactly the same thing. We got told to bring a teddy bear. Within a day or two, I started to use him as a rugby ball.
Yeah.
Kicking him around the dormitory. And first 3 weeks were reasonably good. I was popular. I was good at sport. I was reasonably academic, at that time. And then after 3 weeks, my mother didn't come for a leave day. And suddenly I was like, oh my God, I've given up dad, which has been great, but I've also given up everything else. And then I suddenly thought, oh my God, I don't want to be here, but I couldn't tell anybody. And therefore, after that, I went from being quite confident to being very depressed. And then I started to get picked on. And I cried in front of people. So after that point, I'm like you, I just do whatever I can to survive this.
And if kid, when they pick up on that, that you've shifted, that something is that you're showing vulnerability, or you've gone into yourself, I mean, they will come for you, won't they? And
they did. All the dormitory.
Oh yeah.
30 boys came into my cubicle.
Yeah.
And they're all laughing and Cross is not so cool now, is he? He's not. It's like that. Yeah.
And the thing is, it's relentless as well. There's no going home at the end of the day. There's no, going and being able to wander around a town or whatever. You are literally in there 24 hours a day. You cannot escape it, and it's all about just being together all the time, isn't it? I mean, it's like there is no let up from it. So yeah.
Yeah. So Kind of going into some of the survival methods.
Mm.
What are some of the survival methods that you learned at school? Maybe you see that with clients or from the research. What are they?
I think, one thing I used to do was I would really search out adult care,
Mm-hmm.
so parental care, really. So there would be teachers that I absolutely like just straight onto.
Mm-hmm.
There was Miss Burnett, I think, when I was 8, and I just, I remember calling her mummy one time in class, and um, I really just needed her kind of care. But I think that carried on throughout all of my schooling. There were teachers that I just gravitated towards, but in a really strong way. I mean, it wasn't just I liked them. I would hang out with them in break time or at lunchtime. I'd sit next to them, and it kind of gave me a little bit of power, I guess. I mean, it's a bit of a risky one because other kids might not like it, and I think that was the case. Other kids didn't like it, but they sort of knew they couldn't really kind of go there. I had to keep my wits about. I mean, this is real survival stuff, isn't it? But I had to always keep my wits about me, and make sure that I wasn't sort of alone. But I would always try and sort of hang out with adults. I think the other thing, and we talked a little bit about this when we last spoke, but I mean the other thing I did was that I tried to kind of make myself a little bit invincible.
Mm-hmm.
So I dressed very well, always had like kind of like the best clothes. I always adapted my kind of school uniform, just so that it was kind of cool. Um, and I found that made other kids just be a bit wary of me or kind of stay away from me or just, so it sort of worked. It worked for me. Um, yeah, I just try to make myself a little bit kind of untouchable in that way. I mean, at the age of sort of 13, 14, it wasn't easy, going through sort of early puberty and looking terrible and everything, greasy hair and spots, but yeah. So I think that was it, because yeah, I was no good at sport, absolutely hopeless at it. And of course, those schools are, they're all about cricket pitches as far as the eye can see, or rugby. Everyone has to play rugby.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I do not have the build for rugby. It's never going to work. Um, so yeah, I just made myself a little bit kind of untouchable with that. And also the other thing, when I got to my second school, was there were girls' schools in the town, and
Mm-hmm.
we at that time we were allowed into town,
Mm-hmm.
um, after lunch or whatever. So I'd go and hang out with all the girls, who of course were, generally a lot more mature, and they were just kind of much nicer than any of my horrible, spotty, greasy-haired, you know, colleagues at school. So I made myself really unpopular, but with them. But I just always just kept myself, removed from it all. It's risky strategy. I wouldn't advise it to anybody, but it kind of just about got me through.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Just as you say that, it's like seeing our survival strategies that we employ at school,
Yeah,
how that impacts us later on.
yeah,
Whether, if it sounds like with your strategy, you started to question things quite early at age 30, do some therapy. For me, my survival strategy was to not talk.
mm,
I was good at sport, but to kind of act like the psycho, I internalized my angry father. So
yeah,
people were like, they knew to stay away from me.
yeah,
What that meant, though, is because I wasn't really part of the crowd, later on, I could start questioning this stuff.
yes,
And
yeah,
I wonder those that, you know, fitted in, whether that's, you know, I've been reading some of the work of Jennifer afraid and betrayal trauma, and saying often those who have been in an institution cannot betray
Mm.
the
Yeah.
institution.
Yes.
Um,
It's interesting, that, isn't it? And of course, these institutions, they are, that's their whole point. You go from the panelled halls of prep schools, the panelled halls of public school, to the panelled halls of Oxbridge, to the panelled halls of the law courts or whatever. I mean, it's just you're always in it and always kind of part of it. So yeah, that structure is hard to kind of deviate from, or to
mm,
to just to betray. Actually, we have to kind of betray it at some point and say,
mm,
no, this isn't. I am living this false self, and I'm not living my, who I am, and
mm, mm,
I need to discover my, all my different parts, and you know, who, my vulnerable self as much as anything. So yeah.
mm. What did you do to start to flip that, to kind of start letting go of these survival mechanisms?
I think my parents, that they're interesting in that they sort of, they don't really hold much stick with kind of panel tools and old boys networks and all of that. Even though my dad went to that school, he always sort of complained that he never benefited from the old boys network, and he went out and did his own thing. He went out and became a successful businessman who just did his own thing. And so I very much had that kind of, that message coming at me all the time. And of course, it was the 80s. It was all about individualism. So I very much kind of grew up, and my development was all about, okay, if I can't be part of the old boys network that I don't want to be part of anyway, I'm just going to be an individual. I'm
Mm,
going to just hold myself. I don't need anybody else. I don't need to rely on anyone else. I can just do this all by myself. And, to a certain extent, I took, this is what boarding school has given me. It's given me that kind of strength. I know that I am sort of privileged, and I can just go and do my own thing. I mean, that got me so far. That sort of just about got me through my 20s. I mean, by the end of my 20s, it really wasn't working well. And
mm,
when it came to relationships, it was really challenging.
mm,
But yeah, by my early 30s, I just found it really, really hard. And people were sort of saying to me, they would sort of say, you come across as a really nice guy, and you come across as charming and social, but there's this kind of really deep anger within you. And I would just be like, you're not meant to notice that. So yeah. And I've always got away with it because I got good teeth, I've got a good smile, kind of, I could always kind of put on the charm. But the anger was there, the absolute fury at not having my attachment needs met,
mm,
the trauma of what I went through, and the outcome of all of that, just feeling that I wasn't really functioning fully, that relationships were really hard, and that maybe some of this stuff had, was because of that. So yeah, the individualism and the kind of well hidden anger really wasn't serving me too well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. And you talk about relationships. That's kind of the next area I'd love
Yeah.
for us to explore. What is the impact on relationships, for you as a therapist, but also in your own life?
Yeah.
Impact for us.
So as we know, the held theory is that when we have good enough attachment, we are able to self-regulate,
Mm,
we're able to empathize, we're able to be relational, we're able to deal with threat and challenge and all those kind of relational
mm,
complexities that come with the human condition.
mm,
That's the outcome of good enough attachment.
mm,
So when we don't have good enough attachment, all of those things are are challenged and
mm,
can be difficult. And of course, we we can sort of function on some level. We can be charming, we can be social, we can be sympathetic, we can empathize at times, but to be really to deeply connect with people, to deeply empathize, to be able to deal with threat and relational complexity, we need good enough attachment. And I mean, luckily, as you know, we all have neuroplasticity.
Mhm.
Hopefully, uh, as we get older and beyond our boarding school experiences, we've had good enough attachment, and we've people have come into our lives who have been patient and have cared for us. And I think that's why therapy is so important,
Mhm.
because at last we meet someone who will patiently uh, be alongside us as we act out, as we push away, as we tell them they're useless, or say therapy's not working, or try and wriggle out of it as much as possible. And we have this lovely consistent person who's there for us. So that's why therapy is so important. And if we're very, very lucky, we meet someone in our private life who
Mhm.
kind of goes, I know there's deep anger there, and I know there's deep trauma there, and I know there's a lot of complexity there, and I'm going to hang out, I'm going to hang in there for you and be there for you. But that's not guaranteed.
Mhm.
And, sometimes those people go, enough, I can't deal with this any longer, and they
Mhm.
leave, and that re-traumatizes us again. So,
Mhm.
my abandonment issues have always been have always been very, very acute, to say the least.
Mhm.
So, and I still really struggle with relationships and intimacy. It's incredibly tough for me.
Mhm.
And I'm often drawn to people who are avoidant and not available, and maybe have their own trauma.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not easy. Really, really not easy.
Mhm.
I think having an awareness of this, and just being gentle on ourselves, and taking it one step at a time, being able to communicate, we begin to kind of make a little bit of some gentle steps in the right direction. But yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
How about you?
Relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I feel very blessed. My wife, myself, we got together 2008. We met 2007. It was a spiritual retreat. Um, and yeah, she's 13 years older than me. And I was 32 at the time. I just come out of the monastery. And yeah, we have an amazing relationship. It's been very challenging at times. And yet, because of the work I've done, of the people I've spoken to, see now that as an ex-boarder, I thought I had to have a perfect relationship in all areas.
Mm.
And when it wasn't, then I would just, oh my God, I couldn't handle it.
Yes. Yeah.
And with her, I've understood that, speaking to Dr. Claudia Gold about attachment, and she called it rupture and repair, this idea that 75% of relationships is this rupture.
Mm.
And then, but the important part is the repair.
Really.
For
Yes.
me as an ex-boarder, because there was never any repair at
Yeah.
school, you
Yeah.
didn't have a parent to come in and goes, all right, and you just get over it like that. No, I held on to something
Yeah.
all my time there.
Yeah. I
There was
really.
never a repair.
Yeah.
If you
Relative.
slighted me, I'll never talk to you again.
Yeah.
Or if
Yeah.
we've had a fight, right,
Yeah.
So for me, it's been amazing, my relationship with her, that I've been able to, she's been very patient with me, very loving.
Mm.
And yeah, I've felt got my stuff still around certain things.
Of course. Yes.
But yeah, I feel in a very blessed
Mm.
place, being together 15 15 years, 14 years.
Yeah, you're very lucky. You're very lucky.
Mm.
It's a real blessing, isn't it, to have someone who goes alongside us and is there for us and yeah, puts up with us sometimes. That is for sure.
A lot of the time.
A lot of the time, yeah, does that repair, helps us with that repair.
Yeah, thank you. So I realize we're up to 2 o'clock now, so
Yeah.
time goes quickly.
Mm.
We've spoken about some of the other questions I had was, you said in your article, boarding schools do not offer the love and care a child needs. You've kind of spoken about that a bit,
Mm.
that, and the other thing was boarding schools claim to be a safe and secure environment.
Yeah.
You've spoken a little bit about that,
Yeah.
you know, even
I mean, boarding schools, they're not set up to give kids love and care. It's not their point, is it? Their point is to kind of hothouse you through exams and get you into decent university because your parents are paying so much money. They want to guarantee that their kid is going to get into a decent university and go down a decent career path. That's what they want. So yeah, they're just not set up for love and care. And there's no one to do that. There is literally no one to do that. I mean, matron and her assistant are not going to be doing that. That is the bottom line. And so yeah, I mean, love and care, it does not exist in boarding schools. That's the bottom line. And as for how kind of safe and secure boarding schools are, well, as we know, they don't have to be signed up to Ofcom's safeguarding protocols. I mean, they can just make it up as they go along. And sometimes I've read prospectuses where they claim that they follow all sorts of safeguarding rules and regulations. They don't. It's nonsense. They just make it up. So they don't have to do that. And they're not accountable either. They're not accountable to Ofcom. And that really does need to change, something around the law there. But I think the problem is as soon as you start, picking away at those threads, the whole thing will just unravel, which of course is my great hope that, at some point we look at this system and structure and go, this is not fit for purpose. This is not fit for young people in the 21st century. When we look at other countries, they don't have this system and structure. I know other countries do have kind of weird military boarding schools or finishing schools or whatever, but it's not the same. And it's not the same as definitely don't think they're any good, but it's not the same as this huge kind of class structure thing that we have in this country. That absolutely needs dismantling. I mean, there's no two ways about it. It doesn't, it's not fit for purpose. So,
how do we do that? What's
yeah,
hearing, should boarding schools be abolished?
yeah, yeah.
How do we go about doing it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? It's a really tough one because it is so interwoven with the fabric of our society and our whole class structure and vested interests and the political nature of this country. So it's extremely difficult. But I would like to think that conversations like this, the research that is being done, greater awareness about child development, all of these things are contributing to this conversation and this debate. Unfortunately, I really fear that it'll be terrible, terrible tragedies that will be the thing that kind of bring it into sharp focus. And that will continue unless these places, continue with their fantastic PR and ability to keep these stories covered up. But that's why it's really important to get these stories out there. And I really hope that people listening to this, if they have stories, that they can maybe take those steps and be brave and start sharing those stories or writing about those stories or building connections with other people. It's really important. And that's what we need to do. We just need to keep it foreground all the time, and scrutinize these places. They spent enough time scrutinizing us. We're going to scrutinize them, and we're not going to let them get away with it. We're not going to let them get away with it.
Yeah, powerful words. Thank you, Richard. Yeah. I've been, and I see that, I've said this in other podcasts, is this importance of a network. I see that myself, I often do things on my own because that's an ex-boarder thing. But I do see that we need to, as this group of, whether it's therapists or ex-boarders, join up and go, right, how do we move together? If it's 10 of us, 100, 1,000 of us doing this is very different from just one person. And for many years, it was just Nick Duffel or Joy Shavrin. So if we can go, right, time for us to, start,
We have to be brave, don't we? We do. We really do. We have to name names. We have to tell stories. We have to stand up, and we have to say, this is what happened, and it's got to stop. We have to. And we have to say to our friends, do not send your child to boarding school. We have to be brave, even if it risks a rupture with them. We have to say, no, your kid is not right for them. It's not right for them.
No. Yeah, it kind of comes back to a point earlier, but it's people who say to me they've changed and they say, oh, you can WhatsApp or their phone. I tried to point out, do you remember lockdowns when your mother or you were completely isolated and you can only get in touch with other people through Zoom? How many people struggled mentally? They kind of were going insane because of that. It's not the same as actual physical contact or
these kids are experiencing skin hunger every single day, aren't they? They're like, there is no touch. There is, like one of my friends said to me, oh yes, at Radley, they're allowed their mobile phones. Well, they're allowed their mobile phones at the end of the day. Matron gives them their mobile phone at the end of the, like, what the fuck? This is insane. It's like, it's insane on every level. It's having your mobile phone at the end of the day is not good enough attachment. It's not. It's shit.
It's not. No, dude.
Like the worst attachment. It's like, it's zero attachment. It's like, this is not good. Radley, not good. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Now I'm off on one.
Fine. Well, thank you for today. And how do people find out more about your work? Reach out to you?
Sure. Yeah. So I've got a website which is www.richardhughestherapy.com, and I'm always happy to talk with people or share or so that's all good. And I've got a blog on my website, and which I haven't been doing a huge amount of recently because I've been doing a little bit more kind of fiction writing recently. But I will dip back into that at some point and maybe do a few more boarding school blogs.
Yeah, please do, because I'll link your website and the blog that drew me to you in the description. So if people want to reach out to Richard, please do go and click on that. But yeah, thank you so much for your work. And
well, look, thank you.
All my guests is, if I can support you in any way, please do.
Yeah. Well, look, ditto, and thank you for doing this and absolutely giving everyone a platform to share and talk, and it's been fun. So thank you.
Blessings. Okay, take care, Richard.
All right.